هل باتت التطورات الأخيرة في المنطقة تبدو كخطوات تجاه خطة لترسيخ عالم أحادي بذريعة نشر الديمقراطية؟ وهل نشهد اليوم نظام عالمي جديد؟ وما يعني ذلك؟ من داخل القوات البحرية الهندية، معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. طبول الحرب ضد إيران ما فتئت تقرع ولسنوات خلت. الذرائع مختلفة على رأسها مزاعم بسعي إيراني لحيازة قنبلة نووية، بيد أن الولايات المتحدة وبذريعة حماية أمنها تشن حروبا استباقية وتكشف النقاب عن قنابل نووية صغيرة ذات قوة تدميرية تبلغ 6 أضعاف قوة قنبلتي هيروشيما وناكازاكي، والتي وصفها الرئيس الأمريكي الأسبق جورج بوش بالسلاح التقليدي، وأعطى بذلك قادة الجيش الأمريكي صلاحية الاستخدام التلقائي لهذه الأسلحة عندما يرون الأمر مناسباً. بوش بدوره هدد إيران باستخدام هذا السلاح ضدها، وأن كل الأمور مطروحة على الطاولة. من جهة أخرى، ورداً على هذا التصعيد، إيران تهدد بإغلاق مضيق هرمز الشريان الحيوي لمنطقة الخليج. بحسب الخبراء، تكمن أهمية مضيق هرمز في أنه أحد أهم الممرات المائية في العالم وأكثرها ازدحاماً بالسفن، كما أنه ممر استراتيجي يتحكم في الملاحة النفطية لنحو 40% من نفط العالم المنقول بحراً بشكل يومي. ويرى الخبراء أن تعطيل حركة الملاحة في المضيق ممكن، لكن من الصعب إغلاقه كاملاً لأسباب عسكرية وتقنية. ماذا يخبرنا الأميرال فيشنو الرئيس السابق لهيئة الأركان البحرية الهندية عن أهمية هذا المضيق وعن طبيعة البرنامج النووي الإيراني وماهية النظام العالمي الجديد ومآل الصراع في الشرق الأوسط؟ Right, former Indian Armed Forces Chief and strategic and geopolitical expert Admiral Vishnu Bhagwat, welcome to the Inside. Well, sir, today concerning the recent developments that is taking place all over the globe, let's say, particularly in this region, more and more foreign policy experts agree that these developments is just a step to inculcate a unipolar world under the guise of promoting democracy.
Yes, I agree with the main thrust of your question, but it is not only now. Unipolarity, which would mean hegemony and dominance of Western or Zionist power, has been a major feature as far as the Middle East and this region is concerned, primarily because it contains 80% of the world's energy, that is oil and gas resources. This policy actually began in the early part of the 20th century and was translated into actual policy on the ground and plans on the ground, first through the efforts of a Zionist clique consisting of Lord Balfour, Lord Rothschild, and then Prime Minister Lloyd George of Britain in about 1917. Thereafter, they took all things in their hand and not only gained military prominence, but were able to install their own puppet rulers and also demarcate the boundaries of this region with a pencil and ruler as they wished and as they saw the strategic future. In fact, they debated and discussed and came to the conclusion that the region has enormous strategic possibilities. And that's where the policy derived from.
Right.
After the war, after the Second World War, with the agreement between the US president and the ruler of Saudi Arabia that oil trade will be dollar denominated, things became much easier because everybody had to pay in dollars for the oil that was produced here. The succession of policies which have a continuity as far as the Pentagon and the State Department is concerned is all centered on oil.
Right. So you agree here that starting from the first Iraqi campaign, Desert Storm, the remaking of the world order can be said to have begun.
Yes, and
what does that exactly mean?
well, I'll just come to that. What it means is that the military and foreign policies of the United States are actually determined by the Zionist bankers, the big Zionist bankers in the city and in New York, Wall Street, and that the policy as it is translated and as it is determined is done by these bankers and by these giant oil and armament corporations. Now, it was further elaborated. It is no secret. They did not keep it as a secret. It was publicly declared. It came in the form of the Carter Doctrine, thereafter the US Presidential Doctrine 1959, and has been followed by the Clinton Doctrine, which says very clearly that the US will take unilateral preemptive action wherever it deems necessary to protect its investments, the resources of the region, and the markets which are coming into play more and more.
This was always the pretext of
That's
the US
right.
actions.
So therefore, there's a continuity. There's nothing surprising about it. It has got accentuated after the political capitulation of the Soviet Union in 1991. And then, as a very famous and very good writer from the West called William Engdahl has said in his book A Century of War, wars and violence have continued. In fact, violence is the main export of the West to this region and of course to the rest of the world.
Right. Now let's come a bit here to the Iranian nuclear dossier. Are there grounds, so to say, for such harsh reaction towards Iran concerning this particular issue on the part of developed countries, or is it just a means by the US to practice their hegemony over their economic and political hegemony over certain
Yes, they see Iran post the Shah as an independent-minded nation, which has every right to be. Iran signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, and has adhered to every article of this treaty. The only violator and gross violation has been done by Israel, who went and built the nuclear arsenal which it's got, for which nobody is acting. In fact, to show its sincere intentions, Iran was the one which mooted a proposal for a nuclear weapons-free Middle East zone, a peace zone. That has been just simply set aside. This is just a smokescreen, a cover to do a regime change, to bring down Iran and make it a junior partner or a proxy state like the other proxy states in the Middle East or in this region, and therefore not come in the way of the complete control and dominance and command of this region. So the Iran nuclear issue has no substance, and this is not being said by me. Various reports, inspection reports of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Authority, have substantiated. Not only that, the 100 US intelligence agencies which produce a national intelligence estimate have repeatedly said, and particularly in October 2010, just 2 years ago, that Iran is not embarked on a nuclear weapons program, and the type of enrichment that it is doing just now is nowhere near. It does not take you to a trajectory, but they built any number of stories. They can build any number of stories. The West is a perfect coordination of the media. It is a part of its wide spectrum dominance strategy that the media only echoes the lies which are manufactured in Wall Street, in the city, in Tel Aviv, and of course in Washington, D.C.
So these sanctions against Iran, who are they really targeting here? The sanctions against Iran. Are they after toppling the regime through these sanctions?
Well, there is a very...
Or they are just targeting the people of Iran?
Yes, well, both. But there is a well-respected international law interpretation that actually sanctions are another form of waging war. And we have seen this in the case of Iraq, where more than 500,000 children in 1992, 1993, that is many, many years ago, had lost their life because of these sanctions, because of the inadequacy of water and electricity system, the sewage system. They were all affected, and the whole idea of sanctions is to weaken, a nation and its people, and it is really a preliminary step to full-scale overt war. It's really a covert war, which sanctions are, and there's no other way. There's no other way to look at it. And in fact, the United States and in fact the Zionist oligarchy have been carrying out a covert war in Iran after Iraq from the beginning of 2005, 2006, by having and funding units like the MEK, and by having covert operation of US special ops groups inside Iran. So there is a continuing war. Yes, it's
organization, yes. They just removed it from the terror list organization. But here the question that I would like to ask is, what is the essence of a nuclear program for Iran and other so-called rogue states by the US and its allies? Is it just, as a means of developing itself and its program? Is it a security guarantee, or is it a potential threat?
Well, as you know, the axis of evil theory or proclamation was made by the US in 2001, 2002.
George W. Bush.
That's right. And it included Iran and North Korea. You also know of the Iraq dossier, which was compiled by the UK based on absolutely fudged documents, and even a fudged laptop, so-called study of how a Iranian scientist was supposed to be designing a nuclear warhead. But these are all stories. Hundreds and thousands of these stories are manufactured. They are part of the manufactured news, which is part of the PSYOPs or psychological ops agenda, a complement to actual war, which the Westerners have perfected with their control over the world media, by and large the world media. And that is how that whole story of the Kuwaiti babies on the incubator and the air supply being removed was also manufactured. So the whole thing is contrived. It has got no truth whatsoever. Their own IAEA, which was largely dominated by US experts and US nominated chairmen, have continuously gone on till the last chairman, the Egyptian chairman of the IAEA, who, after he retired, came out, that's right, Mohammed al-Baradei, who openly came and said this was just a manufactured lie. There's perhaps little or no sense in saying anything more about the so-called nuclear weapons program of Iran, which he had declared so many times. Al-Khamenei has said that Quran prohibits the manufacture or the use of such weapons which affect women, children, and the large population, and that is a non-competence.
Admiral, here, does every country has the right to develop its nuclear program?
Of course, the NPT gives every nation a right to develop a nuclear energy program as a part of its development process, as a part of its development resources, because after all, everybody knows that oil and gas resources, which are basically fossil resources, fossil energy resources, do not last forever. And the nuclear energy program, if it is an indigenous program, it takes long time to perfect this. India has its own experience of this program. We also want to get away from the normal, conventional way of developing nuclear energy and go into a thorium fast breeder technology program, which was formed by Dr. Bhabha, a famous nuclear scientist of India. So there is no question that that is an inviolate right of all nations, like everybody else has. And it's very, very strange, not strange actually, but it's just an expression of hegemony, dominance, and crude tactics. That US, which possesses the largest number of nuclear weapons in the world to destroy it many times over, first of all, is trying to preach to a nation which is proclaimed and has actually opened its facilities to international inspection.
Right.
And also Israel, which has used this, has accumulated accumulated nuclear weapons mostly with Western help and technology and turning a whole blind eye, and not only has accumulated but continuously threatens the nations of this neighborhood or in this region
with their weapons.
To nuclear weapons, micro nukes, and the US classifies micro nukes as weapons up to 20 kilotons. That is 3 times the weapons used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki as conventional weapons. And they say that we have the right to use it, and they have delegated that right to theater commanders.
Even
you can
the
imagine
Israelis,
what
you know, they use the phosphorus bombs,
they
and they used in the different
they use the
recent
daisy cutters, they use the phosphorus bomb,
the
they
Gaza
use
people and the people of Lebanon in 2006.
You have seen it. We have all seen this. I have also been.
And in Fallujah, the Americans, they have used it also against the unarmed civilians.
Absolutely, unarmed civilians, children.
Right. Admiral, we're going to stop now for a short break, and then we'll be back to discuss more the strategic scene in the region through The Insight. The Insight will be back after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Insight with former Indian Armed Forces Chief, strategic and geopolitical expert, Admiral Vishnu Bhagwat. Welcome back, Admiral. Well, sir, allow me here to ask a question. Are the Gulf states immune to the changes and the developments that are taking place in the region?
I think the Gulf states themselves are very sensitive to the fact that change is taking place, whether by under the cover name of promoting democracy, or whether they perceive, of course, they know it in their own minds, that it is an orchestrated attempt to paint Iran and its friends like Syria, Lebanon, Palestine as people who are provoking this change, or as aggressors. That's the way they like to paint it, because their own regimes, which have been long protected by US military, are under threat, and they are basically under threat from their own people. They are threat from the people because all the dollars which have been earned from the export of oil are put in banks, Zionist banks in London, in New York, and even in Tel Aviv. And the people themselves don't have enough employment or satisfactory employment. And many of them, is surprising, for the richest countries in the world, the richest resources per capita are actually in want. Therefore, and there is a kind of a dictatorial rule which does not permit even the basic freedoms, or freedom of expression, freedom of holding a political point of view, or having a democratic process not even in its infancy. And that is why we see all these nascent troubles, whether in Saudi Arabia, whether in Bahrain, which is of course a US Navy base in Manama, or in Dubai, or even in Kuwait, where there are simmerings of such trouble, or for that matter in Jordan, or for that matter, of course, in the whole of Maghreb. But you see, the American or Zionist policy has always been overtly to describe this whole region as an arc of instability. That is the inside policy.
Right.
That is from Maghreb to East China, which also covers Pakistan and India. So they are certainly, they know that their thrones or chairs, ruling chairs, are actually unstable.
Jeopardized.
They are rocking.
Yeah.
And unless they are able to bring about essential participation of the people and giving the people even the smallest amount of freedom to carry on with their own lives. They know that this is an unstable situation. They know that the presence of the foreign military forces is contributing to the instability. They know that what has happened in Iraq and Libya, that is a slaughter and genocide of people, causes a particular feeling amongst the Arab people.
Right.
They also know that there are voices like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah,
Of
who is
Hezbollah.
perhaps the most popular voice or in the Arab street or amongst the Arab
Secretary General
people,
of Hezbollah,
in
yes.
spite of their best, of their best efforts to isolate such voices. They know that this finds echo. Such voices, such expression of the future and hope is finding a echo in the hearts of the Arab people.
Though they tried through the sectarian strife that they are trying to promote in the region to demonize the figure of a person like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah.
But it appears that they have not succeeded and that they are failing. And in spite of a monopoly in the official media, word goes around of what he says. Every sentence goes of the great leader Sheikh Nasrallah goes around to every Arab people, and that is where they get their hope and inspiration from. I mean, amongst the figures that, because he goes basically to what the Prophet said. He goes basically to the point that if you walk with the oppressor, knowing him to be an oppressor, and support the oppressor, then you have walked away from Islam. Now this is plain truth. This everybody can see. You don't have to be a graduate, a postgraduate, a doctorate to see what the Arab ruling regime, most of them, are doing. That is walking with the oppressor and oppressing their own people along with him.
Right.
That is not a truth which can be hidden.
Sir, now there are certain talks of various scenarios that in case there was a strike, a US strike or an Israeli strike against Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran is going to block the Hormuz Strait. How important is the Hormuz Strait?
Well, let me proceed
As an admiral, from your expertise, what can you tell us about the importance of this strait?
Well, let me precede my remarks. First of all, these threats are not new. Nuclear and non-nuclear, all in violation of the United Nations Charter. And they are not new. That is to basically bring about regime change in this region. But let me also quote to you whom I consider to be an outstanding military figure in Iran, presently. That is the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of Iran Armed Forces, General Hassan Firozabadi.
Yes.
And he says, Iran seeks no war. But if war is imposed on Iran, Iran will stand up against it and against the super capitalists. That is, he is referring to Zionists. So he is well aware, but he is also at the same time warning and cautioning the people of the region that there is a new strategy. The strategy of enslavement. A new enslavement system is taking shape. And that is not necessarily based in the United States. It is spreading globally and spreading its tentacles globally. He's talking about the global financial oligarchy and the Zionist project of controlling all the economic and financial resources and, in fact, commodity resources like oil and gas. Now we come to the Hormuz. Hormuz has always been considered of great strategic significance. Right from the time the Anglo-Iranian oil company stepped into Kuwait and stepped into Iran.
Right.
That's from the time that, and 20% of the world's oil flows via the Gulf, which is, as you know, where Persian Gulf, which is only 21 miles wide. Now there have been so many studies which have been done by the Western countries, in the US military colleges and European military colleges by NATO, and Iran is constantly being threatened. It is actually, the sanctions have been implemented. So as a result, about a number of MPs from the Iranian Majlis, that's the Iranian parliament, did consider a suggestion that they would have to retaliate with a blockade of the Persian Gulf, of the Gulf, to stop the oil traffic for those tankers which were of countries belonging to those countries which are not permitting Iranian oil exports. But it's my professional view that all these threats, counter threats, and studies and posturing in the media is not really a reality, because
but
while the Iranians have the capability, and I say not only through mines, but through actual weapons, excellent choice of weapons which they have made, and placed them in various locations, small locations, not big, large locations, in various camouflage locations along the coast or the littoral of the Gulf on the Iranian side, and they can more than match any counter effort by them. The fact is that the US fleet or the NATO fleet cannot sustain itself in the Gulf, in the constricted waters of the Gulf, and if they have to launch a cruise missile attack, they will have to do it from 300, 400, 500 miles away from the Gulf. That is more towards the Red Sea and the western part of the Arabian Sea. But I would also, since you have raised this issue of the whole area security, I would just like to think aloud. And I am sure, I am very sure, that the general staff and the authorities in Iran would have taken all precautions to secure and to keep secure their electronic order of battle, which means their electronic resources, their electronic means of waging war. Because the first thing that these forces, the forces inimical or adversarial to Iran will do is to try and neutralize all the radar, communications, and electronic networks of the Iranian armed forces, and try to disrupt the command and control and communications network of the Iranian nation.
Do you think they will succeed in that?
Well, as I said, I'm sure that these matters have been very closely studied, particularly the
Because, you know, the Iranians, and we've seen that they are always there to take you by surprise.
Well, I think the Iranians have done marvelously in the area of indigenous development of weapons. They have done a lot of thinking. I'm speaking as a Navy admiral. They have done a lot of good thinking. They have developed and deployed the most cost-effective and military-effective small systems, not very large systems, but small systems, all of which would be effective in the strategic environment or in the environment around the Gulf. And also, I must say, as they have also said, that and the experts, not only experts, but the people holding the top positions in the security, intelligence, and military establishment of Israel itself, who have warned the Israeli Prime Minister that do not think of this. Similarly, the Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff of the US, that is General Dempsey, himself has said, and his predecessor also said and emphasized at various points of time in the last few years, and their national intelligence community, that waging a foolish, unthought, unprovoked aggression on Iran can have unpredictable consequences, not only for the US, not only for the Zionists, but for the entire region and maybe
the globe.
The globe.
Former Indian Naval Forces Chief, strategic and geopolitical expert, Admiral Vishnu Bhagwat, thanks a million for joining us on The Inside.
Thank you, shukran.
You're most welcome, sir. إذن كنا معكم من داخل نادي البحرية الهندية من مومباي في الهند، ودائما نكون مع لقاء جديد وقضية جديدة من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net. إذن theinside@almayadeen.net. www.ecom.net. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.